Hey everybody, hope you're doing great. I'm Brian Jenkins, and today we're going to talk about functions in our Arduino tutorial. Now, from a bird's eye view, a function is a self-contained unit of program code designed to accomplish a particular task. Think of functions as building material for Arduino programs. Just as your house is made of wood, drywall, and other materials, Arduino programs are composed of different parts. These parts are functions. If you've programmed in C at all before, you're likely familiar with the function main, which every C program needs to have. If you programmed Arduino before, you probably know that every Sketch or Arduino program needs to have setup and loop. Since Arduino is based on C, main is there, it's just hidden. Arduino comes prepackaged with many different functions for handling different common tasks. Another cool thing about functions is that you can write your own custom functions to do whatever you want. And we'll talk more about that in another tutorial. So why use functions? Well, first, they save you from repetitious, boring programming. If you have to do a certain task several times in a program, you only need to write an appropriate function once. The program can then use that function wherever it needs to, or you can use the same function in different programs. Experience has shown that the best way to develop and maintain a large program is to construct it from smaller pieces. Each of these pieces is more manageable than the original large program, and these pieces are functions. Using functions is a good idea because it makes a program more modular, hence easier to read and easier to change or fix. Programmers can write functions to define specific tasks. Not only can these tasks find use in multiple places in the program, they can also find use in completely different programs altogether. This cuts down on repetitive work and duplicating the same code over and over again for different programs. For example, if you want to display something on the screen, you would use the serial.print function. And remember that the name before the dot is a library, and the actual function comes after. Now sure, you could write a bunch of code from scratch to print some characters on your screen, but why reinvent the wheel, at least in this case? This has already been done and can be a huge time saver. Instead of writing a bunch of lines of code to handle the low-level operations of writing a character to the screen, you can just call or invoke the function that does this. Way easier. Now let's dissect an example function, serial.print, and talk about the different parts. We're going to use the following code snippet, which I'm going to type here right in front of you, and focus on the function. So let's start this with serial.begin here in setup, and then let's jump over to loop and type serial.print, which is the function we're going to take a close look at. And let's put in here 255 and then bin semicolon, and let's type another serial.print statement. And we're going to do this. Now let's go ahead and compile and upload it. And let's take a peek at what it's doing with the serial monitor. And it's not very interesting, but we can see here it's just printing a bunch of ones. So I'm going to turn that off. And let's talk about this. Now, first we need the serial.begin over here to get an output on our screen with the serial monitor. Without that, you wouldn't be able to see anything here. Now, I talked about the serial monitor in another tutorial, so that's all I'm going to say about that here. Next, we see this particular function, the serial.print function, has two parts with a period or dots in between them. Not all functions in Arduino are like this, like the delay function, which just looks like this. And I'm just going to comment it here. You put a value in here, a number of some sort, and it's just one part. So not all functions in Arduino have two parts, but many of them do. For the ones that do, the general format is a library name, the dot, and then the function name, where the library name is capitalized and the function name is not. And the print function is part of the serial library, so that's why we need both parts for this to work. Now what about all the stuff in the parentheses? These are the function's arguments, which you could think of as, well, the stuff the function uses. The \n inside the quotes in the second print statement tell the computer where on the screen to print the characters and how to print them. In this case, the \n tells the compiler to print the text on a new line. Now, I know there's another way to do this, but for illustrative purposes, we're going to stick with this way for now. Now, the first print statement has two arguments separated by a comma. First, we tell the compiler to print the number 255. The bin stands for binary and tells the computer to print it in binary. That's why we see all ones on a serial monitor, because 255 in binary is just 8 ones. Usually, you'll use just one argument for the serial.print function. The point I wanted to illustrate here is that some functions can take more than one argument, while others, like loop and setup, take none. Some functions return a value. And what do we mean by return? Well, sometimes a function will take some stuff, get a result, and then return that result to the main program or the function that called that function. So let's use this fictitious function here that adds two numbers as an example. Let's type here, we're going to say fake function, and I'm going to make this up. Let's see, int number adder num1 num2. Now, the int in front of the function name indicates that it returns an integer. In this case, that integer is the sum of num1 and num2, which are the things the function takes in or uses. Earlier, I said some functions return a value. Others do not, like the delay function, for example. The delay function just waits a certain amount of time, a number of milliseconds, and then that's it. You may see functions that don't return a value written like this. The void simply means that the function doesn't return anything. Other functions return nothing and take no arguments. And you may see these written like this. And I'm just going to copy, paste, and then in the parentheses, you'll see void again. It just means that, again, the function doesn't return anything, nor does it take any arguments. Now, it's pretty obvious how our fictitious number-adding function works, but oftentimes it's not so obvious how functions work. For now, a good way to think of a function is like a black box that we can't see inside of. The box takes some inputs and then has some sort of output. We don't know exactly what goes on inside the box, and we don't care as long as it works. When we talk about writing our own functions in a later tutorial, we'll go ahead and take a peek inside the box. But for now, we don't know what's in there or how it works. So let's do a quick recap here. A function is a self-contained unit of program code designed to accomplish a particular task. Arduino comes pre-packaged with many different functions for handling different common tasks. Functions save you from repetitious, boring programming. They're composed of different parts, what the function returns, if anything, the name of the function, and the arguments it takes, again, if any. And for now, a good way, or abstraction, to think of a function is like a black box with an input and an output. We don't need to know what's in it or how it works. Now, earlier I mentioned that Arduino has a bunch of built-in functions that you can use. I also talked about parameters and arguments. So let's delve into some of this right now. First of all, let's take a look at some of the built-in functions that comes with Arduino. Here we are at the Arduino website, and if I go to documentation, and over here the language reference, which is an indispensable tool, we see under functions, we have a whole lot of functions that already come built in with Arduino. And you can use this if you're looking for a particular function before you go out and try to write your own to see if first one is already built in to the Arduino IDE. Now, if we want to know more about a particular function and how to use it, all we have to do is click. So let's take a look here at the digital write function, which is one you're going to use a lot. After a while, you'll memorize this stuff once you use these functions a lot. For other functions that you don't use so much, you might have to come back here and take a look. So here we have information about the function digital write. And as we can see here under syntax, we have its parameters. And notice how I said parameters, not arguments. So they're kind of the same thing, but they're different. When you're talking about a function and its parameters, if it has any, which digital write has 2, those are what the function wants or expects. So an argument would be, say if I put pin number 7 in there and I put the value to high. Those would be arguments. These are parameters. So the stuff I actually put in here when I'm writing code is referred to as the arguments. Those are the literal values that you're going to put in. Here we see these are the parameters. It wants a pin and a value. Those are the parameters. And again, the information you actually put in, such as a pin number and some value, high, low, would be the arguments. So that's a difference between parameters and arguments. And again, this is an indispensable resource for learning about functions and how to use them and what kind of syntax you need, what are the parameters, etc. And you can get information on here, what it returns, and then here's some sample code even. So to use a function in the Arduino IDE, all we do is we type the function name in the IDE and we put in, or pass, which is another word for putting in, our arguments. So let's take a look at some other functions here. Here we have the delay function. The delay function doesn't return anything. It only has one parameter, which is the number of milliseconds we want to delay. So if I typed in 1,000 milliseconds in the Arduino IDE and I wanted to use the delay function there, that would be the argument, the literal number of 1,000. Here we can see that not all functions return things. We also know that certain functions like loop and setup, which are absolutely required in every sketch, even if you don't use setup, you still need to have it there. Those don't take any parameters or arguments, and they return nothing. So we're going to get into more detail about functions and how to write your own functions later on. I'll see you in the next lesson.